Paul Skenes turned in more history on Sunday against the Cincinnati Reds. So we're going to have one last debate on the Rookie of the Year award. And should it even really be a conversation?
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Ethan Smith, bringing you your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates from a lifelong fan to lifelong fans just like you. And it's the final week of Pirates baseball on tap for us this week. Milwaukee, New York Yankees. So it's going to be a big week here at Locked On Pirates where we look back at some of the best moments of 2024. We're going to look back on a lot of different things from this year, look ahead to 2025. And then, of course, next week we'll start the player review series where we go over everything that we saw from all the players that we saw this season. No, don't expect a 30-minute episode on Ben Heller, even though I could probably do one if I really tried. And as usual on Mondays, I'm joined by Gary Morgan. Gary, how you doing today, sir?
I'm good, man. I know we just clinched another losing season, but still surprisingly in a good place.
Yeah, and if you guys have listened to this show with me and Gary when we do it on Mondays a lot, by the way, today's episode brought to you by Booking.com. But if you've listened to this show a lot, you'll hear us kind of say that the arrow keeps pointing up. And a large part of that is because of Paul Skenes. And Paul Skenes, again, great performance yesterday against Cincinnati, enough to get their manager fired. I'm just kidding. I know there was more to that than just that. But the big talk of it now that the Pirates are effectively, of course, out of playoff contention, not getting a winning season, you start to kind of shift to the awards category of your conversations. Last year, it was Ke'Bryan Hayes in the Gold Glove Award. We were wondering if he was finally going to win it, and he did because, as I said, he finally hit enough to win a defensive award. And now it's Paul Skenes versus Jackson Merrill for the Rookie of the Year award, a conversation you guys have seen on this show before, of course, with Javier Reyes of Locked On Padres. That was an awesome conversation we had. But what's very interesting is a lot has changed since then. Jackson Merrill there for a while, Gary, on our wonderful sponsor, FanDuel, who we'll hear more about later, was the overwhelming favorite to win this award. But now Paul Skenes has jumped him again at minus 145 for all of my betting people. Merill at plus 110. I got Skenes at plus 750 way back when on September 3rd. So a lot has changed as far as this is concerned. Where do you sit on this, Gary? I mean, I think it's a very intriguing conversation to have, because you're going to obviously have voters that are going to look at Merill and say he plays every day and has helped the playoff team out. And then you have Paul Skenes, who has done historic things. So where is your stance on this whole Rookie of the Year debate going on?
Yeah, I mean, I just talked about it on my show this last Thursday, so check that out too, because we went for about 20 minutes. We're not going to do that here.
No.
Quickly, I think the rookie season that Jackson Merrill is having is one that we'll see duplicated next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. It's a good season, great season, encouraging season. If he was on my team, I'd be stoked. I'd be pushing for him to be Rookie of the Year. But it's not even as good as Brian Reynolds' rookie season in 2019, and he wasn't even a finalist. What Paul Skenes is doing, we're talking crap that hasn't been done since 1913. I mean, like, he's setting records that, like, Babe Adams held for the Pirates. Like, this stuff doesn't happen. Rookie seasons like this don't come up for pitchers. When you're doing something that hasn't been done in a century, there's no way that the baseball world's going to let that go and pretend that you're not the Rookie of the Year. He's going to be the Rookie of the Year.
And I absolutely think so as well. Mainly because you talked about the history of things, and you go back and you go look at everything that's happened. I mean, it would take 25 minutes to go over every accolade that Paul Skenes has met. But me and Jim Stam, your co-host at the Pirates Fan Forum, always joke almost every time we talk about him. He's a starter putting up closer-like numbers. I mean, he has a 1.99 ERA in 22 starts, 131 innings, 167 strikeouts, and a .96 whip. And you mentioned all of these things that he just keeps breaking. Strikeout record for the Pirates from a rookie in a season. All of these things. And Jackson Merrill, and this is where I think it gets kind of lost, is, some people will see like the fans going at it on Twitter, like it's all or nothing on Paul Skenes and Jackson Merrill. No, Jackson Merrill is having a phenomenal season. Do not get that wrong at all. If Paul Skenes was not pitching, he would be the unequivocally unanimous Rookie of the Year in the National League. And
Jackson Churios is closer to Jackson Merrill's performance than Paul Skenes is. To me, this is not a competition for the winner. This is a competition for who's second place. I don't think it's particularly close. I really don't. When you really look at it. And a lot of the arguments people want to make, Ethan, you're making arguments for a different award. You're making an argument for like MVP or what. Team performance has exactly nothing to do with Rookie of the Year. In fact, by nature, what kind of a team is a Rookie of the Year going to typically be on?
Usually a bad team.
Right.
Yeah.
It's dumb to even pretend that team performance has anything to do with it. I mean, it was an entertaining debate a couple months ago. It was slightly boring a month ago. It's over now. I mean, it's not even a consideration for me. I don't think that it's even close. He'll be almost unanimous, I would bet.
Yeah, I struggle to say unanimous just because, again, I do think there's going to be that select few in the voting for it that are just going to, they're going to go with the position player because he plays every day, quote unquote. You'll hear all that stuff. Like you'll hear some guy and you'll see that Paul Skenes got the Rookie of the Year vote, but only like 4 people voted for Merill. And those 4 people will go out on X or Twitter and say, well, I didn't want to vote for a guy on a team that had a losing season. And this guy played every day and was consistently good and clutch with the team, which, mind you, I love that. I see that argument too. The clutch argument. Very hard to have a clutch argument for a pitcher and a hitter. I could see it if they were both like pitchers or both hitters. That metric is recorded differently for pitchers and position players. So I see all of you on Twitter making that argument with Padres fans. Please stop. It looks dumb. It doesn't help the case at all.
I mean, I see no reason to argue with them at all. I mean, It's their player. They should absolutely be touting him and pushing for him. Just like when you have a quarterback that damn well isn't the Heisman winner on your team and he's doing good and you're going to push him anyway, right? Like you and your Georgia winos had that quarterback who straight up stunk balls, but the rest of the team was awesome. And you were out there just like everyone else pretending he was a Heisman candidate. Like it's not, but team performance doesn't have crap to do with it.
Well, and at the end of the day, too, at this core of this conversation as well, I do think this is just good for baseball to have this kind of conversation where you're looking at a kid in Pittsburgh who's done historic things. You're looking at Jackson Merrill, who's had a phenomenal season. You even mentioned Jackson Chourio, who gets kind of lost in this conversation. He's had a good year. And really, by all intents and purposes, people were kind of penning him Rookie of the Year before the year even started. So he's going to be a phenomenal young player. And that's what I like about this, is you saw baseball really lean into talking about Jackson Chourio, talking about Paul Skenes, talking about Jackson Merrill. Baseball needs that badly. It's probably, of the 4 major sports, the worst in marketing its own players, especially their young players. And this is massive. I mean, it really is. And I think that was, even going back to the All-Star game, for me, I could usually care less about the All-Star game. I'll just be honest. I don't care about it all that much. That baseball made me care about it because Paul Skenes threw 1 inning in the All-Star game, and then I promptly shut it off. I
Right.
said,
And
okay, cool.
who got interviewed at the All-Star game? Who started
Paul
the
Skenes.
All-Star game? You know what? Everything in the baseball world is telling you who they want the winner to be. Everybody is. Look at who the face of Major League Baseball is that isn't Shohei Ohtani right now.
Yeah.
It's Paul Skenes. That's who they want. That's who's going to win it. He has never done anything to take that award away from himself. They wanted him to have it from the very beginning.
And that's what the final point I was going to make before we move on to talking about what we want to see in the final week. Paul Skenes did nothing to lose the award. You can say that, it could be said that, yes, his play took a dip from what it was, but also if he was pitching like that consistently, he'd be in the running for the Cy Young Award. And I wouldn't be shocked if he gets a couple votes for that.
I bet he finishes top 3.
Yeah.
And I bet Jackson Merrill doesn't finish even top 10 for MVP. That ought to tell you something.
That'll tell you pretty much the entire story.
Right.
And it's I think it's a fun conversation between both teams when you keep it between the right people.
I think it's a fun conversation as long as you accept the things that get mentioned along the way.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep wanting to circle back to the mythological stuff, like he plays every day, so he gets more, you don't get weight for that. I'm sorry, you don't. You get biases for that. There's some people that vote on this that are biased against pitchers winning the Rookie of the Year. But there is no separate award. And, those people, there aren't as many of those as there are anti-steroid people. That's all I'm going to say. They're not going to gatekeep that award from a guy. That's all.
Well, let's hope that. When does that get announced? Is it like the middle of October, all of this stuff?
Yeah, sometime in there. It's usually pretty directly after the season because you don't have to wait for that one at all.
Yep. So we will hear about that hopefully soon. And it will be, of course, I think, Paul Skenes. I'm pretty confident in it. Gary's pretty confident in it. You should be pretty confident in it. But what do me and Gary want to see in the final week of the season against Milwaukee and the New York Yankees? We're going to discuss that next on Locked On Pirates. Today's episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Book today on Booking.com on the website or in the Booking.com app, because this episode of Locked On Pirates is brought to you by Booking.com, Booking.yeah. So make sure you all go and explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. I'm going back to Savannah in 2 weeks. And of course, I use Booking.com to get some hotel stays for myself because I know the city really well. But if you want to, and you want to get fancy, if you're close to a postseason team, you may be a Pirates fan in San Diego. Maybe you want to go catch a Padres postseason game. You can do that on Booking.com because Booking.com's wide variety of choices across the U.S. allows you to go incognito to all your baseball rival cities. So no matter what team you're rooting for in the postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Booking.com. Booking.yeah. And you heard me mention already about FanDuel.com. Gotta love FanDuel. I'm on FanDuel every weekend because we got football. We got baseball. The preseason for hockey just started, and basketball is right around the corner, so you'll have plenty to bet on FanDuel. And NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, an official sponsor, the Locked On Podcast Network. And since it is the final week of the season. Make sure you go check out Locked on MLB with Paul Francis Sullivan, aka Sully, after you listen to this show. Sully's going to be getting you all ramped up for the postseason. And boy, the postseason has gotten pretty interesting between certain teams. The Mets kind of taking a little bit of an advantage over the Braves. And then how about the Detroit Tigers taking over Kansas City and Minnesota right now? Those three teams separated by just one game. Seattle still kind of in there too with 2 games back. So Sully will be covering all of that on his show over at Locked on MLB. This week I thought was going to be fun, Gary, as far as being able to screw over a certain big market team. But the other team in their division that would have been able to screw them over has kind of just cemented themselves in the spot they're in. So can't hope for that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the Orioles are 6 games back of the Yankees now for the division. So unless the Yankees have an absolute implosion, they will win the AL East and likely win the top seed in the American League. So that's a big talk there. But for the Pirates, they get one more crack at this Milwaukee Brewers team who, interestingly enough, could win the 2 seed here still and get that first round bye in this playoff format, depending on what happens with Philadelphia. But for the Pirates, I mean, what are we looking for? I mean, it's the last week of the year. What should we be having a keen eye on, Gary, as far as the ending of the season goes?
I don't really believe that the Brewers are up for anything but third. I think they're pretty well locked in there. I know they have the possibility mathematically, but I don't see it. I don't think that the Phillies are going to lose all their games and the Brewers are going to win all theirs. If I'm the Brewers, I'm starting to line up for the playoffs. And against Pittsburgh, they plan to throw Freddie Peralta in the second game of the series against the Pirates. I could easily see them pulling him out of that start to line him up to be their game 1 starter in the playoffs. Now's the time. Now they might be able to leave him on schedule, hope that the gap after the season gets him to his 5 days rest and he's able to do it. So we could see him just stay there too. I'm not sure. The Yankees, this series could be completely useless.
Yeah.
They might have nothing to play for but Aaron Judge trying to hit some home runs. So
Yeah.
I don't know. The Pirates could kind of finish with looking like what is a strong finish, and it's going to have nothing to do with anything but the team resting guys. So we'll see. This Milwaukee series has less of a chance of that than the New York one, but still.
Yeah, and I think at this point, too, you look at what we saw yesterday from Paul Skenes. I think that's kind of what you're looking for, is just good performances from these guys that are going to be here next year. I mean, this is a team that a lot of the guys are going to be here. And I'd be honest with you if I wouldn't be honest with you in saying I'd want to see Rowdy Tellez or Michael A. Taylor or Grandal play at all this week. I just don't see the point. I would rather just play guys that are going to be here and that are going to contribute to this team next season. I don't think the extra 15 to 20 at-bats for any of those guys are really going to help you all that much. And it kind of goes back to the conversation we had last year, Gary, about wanting to see some of these young kids start to just make an impact in games, even if it is the final week. I mean, these games still matter. I mean, not really, but they matter enough. So Nick York and Billy Cook and ONeal Cruz and those guys, excuse me, I think you want to see them just have a strong ending to the season. Doesn't necessarily have to translate to wins, but I think that you would like to see some pretty good performances from these kids as things move forward through this final week.
Yeah, I mean, and they still have a chance to better their record from last year. I think that's important if you can get it done. I don't think it's a very good chance, but I mean, you want to do as well as you can, I'm sure. I mean, if you finish 5 games worse than you were last year and then try to sell everybody that you're going to return everything as it was, you're probably going to struggle. I think that's why the record was important all along. But this
Yeah.
is the position they put themselves in at this point. So I'm not going to pretend that these games matter more than they did, a month ago. They don't. As far as like seeing things from guys like at the end of the season, I don't really put as much into that as some fans do. I don't think there's anything they're going to learn in these last 6 days that are going to change anything they were going to do anyway. If they end up starting Rowdy 6 out of 6 games, I'm not going to be super mad about it. I mean, like, I don't care. Let him get his at bats. It doesn't hurt anything. Plus, they might bring him back anyway. Michael Taylor, I haven't understood for 2 months. Grandal, I haven't understood for 2 months. I think you know that. So, like, they've kept him this whole time. I'm hardly going to throw a fit because they play him in these last 6 games. Nothing matters now, really, as far as that. And there's nothing to learn. Mitch Keller's a guy that I think needs to have a bounce back start. I mean, he hasn't performed well in this second half at all. And
No.
he's supposed to be one of the driving forces for getting through the second half. In fact, most of his value is baked into still having something left in the tank to finish the season, not have the rookies like outshine him.
Yeah, and I agree. And you look at next season as well and how that's going to come into play with pitching. I think you're considering you want him to be that guy. I mean, you really do. And I like that you brought up the rookies too, because Paul Skenes. I mean, of course, but you don't want Mitch Keller to take the dip that he's taken in the second half, especially going into next year, because you don't want to have to deal with that problem. Now, each year changes, and we'll see how that all goes. But 6 more games, and you mentioned to have a better record could be a little tough. They would have to go 4-2, I believe, to finish a game better than they were last year. They sit 73 and 83. They have 6 games left. They win 4 games. They will have the 1 game better. They win 3, the exact same record they had last season. Take that
should be doable. Again, we just talked about how both of these teams could very well not care. It's just, and we're probably going to be throwing Paul Skenes against the Yankees, and they're probably going to have at least a rested lineup. Yeah. They're not going to throw one of their key starters at you. I think there's a chance that you could win 4 games here. It'll be disingenuous, but it probably is when you count the series sweep of Washington, or Miami. I mean, like, you count like beating the crap out of those terrible teams, and you should be able to count these teams that are resting people at the end too.
Yeah, and one guy I think we'll be looking at through the this final week as well, Gary, is ONeal Cruz, who also had his own milestone, joining the 2020 club, something we talked about earlier this season as potential for him. What does it mean for ONeal Cruz's future? We'll discuss on Locked On Pirates. Well, if you've bet on ONeal Cruz to have a home run or to have a stolen base on PrizePicks, you probably won a decent chunk of change this year, because you can download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5, because one Caleb Williams passing yard, gets you 1 win on PrizePicks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. Folks, that's 4 weeks of free wins. And PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. And PrizePicks puts their members first. So all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And when my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And welcome back, everybody, to the final part of today's episode of Locked On Pirates here on September 23rd. this year has just felt like it's just flown on by. Just, just flew. It just took flight. And a guy who decided to take flight a little bit this year, I really liked what I've seen from him, is ONeal Cruz, who, of course, joined the 2020 club for the first time in his career. And in saying that, this is really his first full season as a Major League Baseball player. So there you go. But 21 home runs, 22 stolen bases, the OPS just below 800, 76 RBIs. Obviously, you saw ONeal Cruz move from shortstop to center field this year, kind of having the defensive change that we saw. But the bat has been good, and that's really what matters when it comes to ONeal Cruz's game. And you look at what he's done even in the last 30 days. I mean, he's hitting 296. He has 3 homers, 15 RBIs. And I think that's what's been impressive to me down the stretch of this season, Gary. You've kind of seen him take a little bit off his swing and not just swing for power like every time he's at the plate. He's actually kind of just put the ball in good places this year, found a way to get on base, as evidenced by the 22 stolen bases. When he gets on base, he is a pretty big nuisance to opposing pitchers. So for him moving forward, I mean, is this just something we can kind of expect to be the normal for ONeal Cruz moving forward? Just 20 homers and 20 stolen bases a year?
No, I think we can expect more. I think he was injured most of this year, really.
Yeah.
There's been an awful lot of games where I think you would see him really rest that ankle as opposed to try to push it, where he wanted to make sure that he put down enough games and at-bats this year that he could get himself into the conversation for being more of a regular, counted on contributor next year. And he pushed through it. Derek Shelton himself said half the time, he really, really needed to get off that ankle, and they didn't do it very much. They didn't use the DH spot as much as I think we thought they would. I think we were both a little shocked they put him in center field because of that. It's a lot of twists and turns. I'm not saying that shortstop's any easier, but he fought through it all year, knocked that scar tissue right the hell off of there. And really, stolen bases became automatic after the second half of the season started. He could just take off at will.
Yeah.
And he was picking them up almost every time. You're absolutely right about the approach change. No more swinging out of his shoes. He's just swinging and making contact, starting to realize that will bring home runs. But I think I just said on my show to Jim the other day, I think Cruz is the type of player, if he wanted to hit 30 or 40, he could. And if he wants to just be a well-rounded hitter and hit 25 to 30, that's what he'll do. I think he's a little bit of a chameleon for your lineup. He can kind of be what you need him to be.
Yeah, and if he comes into next season with that same approach where it's 25 to 30 home runs, and that ankle is only going to get more healthy. I mean, it really is. It's only going to get better. And you could notice that through the season, like you mentioned. There'd be times where he'd hit a ground ball to second base and he'd jog halfway up the line and go back to the dugout. Some people would call it laziness. I call it him taking care of himself, because there's no reason he needs to hustle all the way down the line to do that. And I don't think the position change really is going to affect too much with the bat. I had some that would be in the comments saying that, yeah, I think this could affect his bat. That was what, after I talked about the Brian Reynolds thing, that is a lot different. Brian Reynolds moving to first base versus left field versus Cruz moving to shortstop to center. Very different in terms of the offensive production change that you could see. With ONeal Cruz, though, specifically, I agree. 2020, I think, should just be the baseline at this point for him. It's almost an expectation of what we should see. Everything else, yeah, he can go higher, like you said. I mean, he could be a 30-30 guy. He could even potentially be a 40-40 player at his peak. These are things that you guys can see. This will happen. And he's only going to get healthier. The bat's going to continue to be there. Again, I kind of might be in the minority here. I like his approach more now than I did before. I don't know if I'm in the minority there, but I would rather him kind of be that guy that gets on base, can put himself into scoring position, and then let the lineup do the rest for him. And even then, with that approach, Gary, we've seen the kid hit the ball 120 mile an hour pretty effortlessly. So I don't think we really have to worry about the home runs taking much of a dip if he changes his approach a little bit, because he's just going to luck into some of them with just how hard he hits the baseball.
Yeah. I mean, I would think like a varied approach is probably ultimately what you want a seasoned Major League Baseball player to do. Like, you want him to be able to go, hey, you know what? Runners in scoring position. I really got to get my bat on the ball here. Let me change my approach and do what I did at the end of 2023, right? Or 2024. That's what I want to do. And then there's times when, listen, I need a grand slam from you, kid. That's really the only thing that's going to even put a dent in this lead that we're, behind. Get up there and swing for the fences and do what you can.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that single would be nice, but that's a couple runs. That's not going to fix this deficit. Get up there and poke one over the wall. I mean, I think you want him to be able to do that. And I think that's what he'll grow into, is a guy that can probably take a couple different approaches to get to the same destination.
Yeah, and I think a great ending point on this ONeal Cruz conversation, what he's done against lefties this year, I think, has been the biggest maturation of what we've seen. 232, 275, 435, 710 split against lefties. He's not like he's just not a mannequin up there anymore against lefties. He's an
It was with a
actual
crippling
threat.
start too. A crippling start against lefties too. He was god awful. So you almost want to like readjust that and kind of look from this point to this point. What did he do? Because there was definite light switch where he turned it. And
Agreed.
my goodness, he was lights out against lefties. In fact, it got to the point where if you were like bringing in a lefty to face him, you might be dumb.
Yeah, and that's, to me, one of the bigger things that we've seen from him as far as maturity goes, kind of the maturation of his game. And again, 2020, it appears like what we're saying is just the start. Maybe he could have 30-30. You'll hear about all this when I do my player review series. Of course, ONeal Cruz will get his whole own show. But folks, thank you for tuning into the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Ethan Smith. Follow me down there at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. Make sure you follow Gary at GaryMo2007 at Pirates Fan Forum. Find our writing work at SteelCityPirates.com. Gary will have 5 thoughts at 5 today. Any big guests this Thursday at 5 on the Fan Forum that anybody should know about on this show?
Well, I don't know if anybody should know about him or not, but we're going to have James Littleton on. He's a good friend of mine, so that's going to be
pretty
fun.
Sure. I think James listens to the show, so
I'm pretty sure
nice
he
little
does.
Shout out for James. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, see ya on the flip side. Wrong button.